They worked in silence, in places the world would never notice. No one knew their names or their faces. Their hands touched powerful machines and secret data, yet they moved like shadows, blending into everyday life while shaping a plan that could change everything. For years, they had prepared, quietly, carefully, as if the world itself had no right to exist anymore. Their belief was simple and terrifying. They thought humanity had become too chaotic, too reckless, and too dangerous to continue. If left unchecked, the human race would destroy itself, and they had decided to accelerate the process. In hidden facilities, far away from the eyes of ordinary people, they studied the world with cold precision. They analyzed economies, weather patterns, energy supplies, and human behavior. They weren't careless or random. Every decision had a purpose, every step calculated to bring them closer to a single, horrifying goal. To them, it wasn't murder. It was a kind of correction, a reset for the planet, a way to erase what they saw as flaws. They surrounded themselves with technology and secrets, believing that no one could stop them. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious. People walked through crowded streets, went to work, laughed with friends, and worried about everyday problems. They argued over politics, over money, over trivial disagreements, never imagining the storm that was quietly forming behind closed doors. Most people didn't even think about what could happen if someone wanted to harm humanity itself. It seemed impossible. Who would want such a thing? Yet, in darkened rooms and underground labs, a group of people had already decided, and they were unstoppable. Or so they thought. The organization had grown in size over the years. Its members were from many places, many countries, and many backgrounds. Some were scientists, some were engineers, some were financiers, and some had no official title at all. But they shared the same vision. They didn't speak of their plans casually. They didn't laugh about them over drinks or leave traces in emails. Everything was coded, encrypted, and hidden. Their meetings happened at unusual hours, sometimes in locations so remote that even a map would struggle to pinpoint them. They trusted no one outside their circle, and even inside, trust was cautious and measured. They used the world's technology as their playground. Satellites, energy grids, transportation networks, and even social platforms became part of their plan. By studying how humans communicated, how governments reacted, and how industries operated, they found ways to manipulate situations without anyone noticing. They weren't interested in fighting armies or invading countries. They were patient. They believed that if they nudged the right dominoes, humanity would fall exactly where they wanted it to. And they had spent years learning how to push each domino with perfect timing. What made them terrifying was not just their plan, but their belief in it. They didn't see themselves as evil. They saw themselves as saviors, correcting a broken system. They convinced themselves that humanity was reckless, greedy, and incapable of making its own decisions. If they didn't act, the planet would eventually collapse under the weight of human mistakes. They imagined a future where life could start over without the errors that humans had repeated for centuries. In their minds, the end was necessary for a new beginning. Yet, despite their confidence, there were cracks they didn't notice. In their arrogance, they believed the world outside was too slow, too disorganized, too ignorant to interfere. They underestimated the small, ordinary people who were already starting to notice strange patterns. They didn't realize that while they watched the world was quietly watching them back. In ways they could not understand, among ordinary people, there were small signs, tiny anomalies that didn't make sense at first. A shipment of materials to a remote location that shouldn't exist. Scientists noticing experiments that didn't add up. Citizens seeing strange lights in the sky, unexplained sounds, or unusual machinery being transported at night. Alone, each observation seemed meaningless, like a coincidence. But together, they formed a pattern that no one could ignore forever. Some of these ordinary people began asking questions. They weren't heroes. They weren't trained spies or secret agents. They were just people who didn't feel right about what they saw. Some were curious, some were worried, some were driven by instinct. They took notes, documented evidence, and shared their discoveries with a small circle of trusted individuals. Most of the time, they were dismissed. People laughed at them, told them they were imagining things, or warned them to leave it alone. But still, they persisted, because deep down, they knew something was wrong. The organization continued its work, unaware that it was being observed. They moved quickly, quietly, and with absolute confidence. They conducted experiments, tested prototypes, and communicated in secret codes. To them, every day brought them closer to their ultimate goal. Every miscalculation by humanity outside their control was a small victory, proof that the world was ready to be reshaped. They felt unstoppable, like the invisible rulers of an unsuspecting planet. But life has a way of surprising even the most careful planners. Even the most hidden plans leave traces, small footprints that someone else might follow. And in this case, those footprints were being followed. Ordinary people, working in silence, started connecting the dots. Each observation, each strange event, each unexplained anomaly became a piece of a puzzle. They didn't know exactly what they were seeing yet, but they sensed the danger. And that sense, that instinct, was the first glimmer of resistance dot as the organization prepared to take its next big step. The world outside continued oblivious. Children played in parks, cars moved through busy streets, and markets bustled with life. No one suspected that an invisible threat loomed nearby, planning to change everything. But for the first time, the seeds of a counterforce had been planted. Quietly, carefully, the humans who noticed the signs were beginning to act. They didn't have armies. They didn't have power. But they had determination, courage, and a willingness to fight for the survival of humanity. The shadowy planners would soon realize that the world was not as defenseless as they thought. Their years of preparation, their precision, their secret networks, all of it had an unseen observer. Every move they made was being watched, analyzed, and countered in ways they could never imagine. For the first time, a crack appeared in their confidence. And though they did not yet know it, that crack would grow, spreading like a silent warning through the foundation of their plan dot in those hidden rooms. Under layers of secrecy and technology, the organization continued. They were close to achieving their goal, unaware that every step forward was also a step into a carefully laid trap. Their confidence blinded them. Their arrogance shielded them from doubt. They believed they controlled the fate of humanity. Yet they were walking into something far greater than their calculations. And so, the story began not with a bang, but with quiet movements, hidden glances, and invisible actions. Humanity, in its ordinary, everyday way, was beginning to fight back, even before the threat was fully understood. And though the shadowy planners could not see it yet, the first threads of their undoing were already forming, spun by the hands of people who refused to stand by and watch the world end. The end of humanity, which seemed so inevitable to them, had a different plan. It was not controlled by power, wealth, or secret knowledge. It was controlled by the simple, quiet determination of ordinary people who saw danger and chose to act. And in that choice, the first battle was silently, invisibly being won. The small group of people who had started noticing unusual events knew they were stepping into dangerous territory. They were ordinary humans, but their curiosity and concern pushed them to act. At first, it was just small observations. An unusual shipment in the middle of the night, machines moving to hidden locations, employees acting strangely at factories. None of these things made sense on their own, but slowly, patterns began to emerge. Something was happening, something big, and they were determined to understand it. They didn't have fancy offices or high-tech gadgets like the organization they were observing. Instead, they relied on what they could access: public records, news reports, personal observations, and conversations. They took careful notes, pieced together timelines, and compared information across multiple sources. Each small discovery was like a spark in the dark, lighting their path toward understanding the scale of the threat. It wasn't easy. People around them didn't always believe them. Friends laughed, neighbors dismissed their concerns, and some even warned them to stay out of it. But the group persisted. There was a shared feeling among them, a quiet understanding that something was wrong and that the world needed someone to pay attention. They didn't know the full plan of the organization, but they sensed its danger, and they knew that ignoring it could cost lives. They began to connect with others who had noticed similar strange occurrences. Scientists, engineers, even a few investigative journalists started sharing information quietly. Each piece of knowledge added a new layer to the puzzle. Slowly, the ordinary people began to form a network, not a formal group, not a team with authority, but a web of observation, communication, and caution. They called themselves nothing, worked without recognition, and moved carefully to avoid drawing attention, while the organization believed it had complete control. It had overlooked something simple, yet powerful: human instinct. Ordinary people notice things. They ask questions. They share stories. And when they see something wrong, they act, even if they are small, ordinary individuals with limited power. That instinct, that quiet determination, became the organization's first real challenge. The small group started to track patterns. They observed delivery routes that seemed unnecessary, warehouses that held strange equipment, and individuals moving between locations at odd hours. They weren't trained spies, but their persistence allowed them to see connections that no one else noticed. Each observation reinforced the sense of urgency. Each unanswered question strengthened their determination. They knew that if they didn't act now, the consequences could be unimaginable. They began documenting everything in detail: photos, videos, notes, timestamps, and location maps. Everything was recorded carefully. They weren't trying to prove anything to the world yet. They were building a foundation of evidence, something they could use if the time came to act. Their work was meticulous, slow, and quiet. It was invisible to most people, but it was already shaping the first line of resistance against the organization. As the organization moved forward with its plans, it unknowingly revealed small weaknesses. Its members were human, after all, and even the most careful humans make mistakes. A wrong shipment address, a delayed communication, a careless security guard, small errors that alone meant nothing. But to the group observing from the outside, these were clues. Each mistake became an opportunity. Each opportunity was a step closer to understanding the full scope of the threat. The organization, confident and methodical, began preparing to execute the next phase of its plan. It was moving faster now, driven by the belief that it was unstoppable. But the group had already anticipated some of these moves. They had begun laying the groundwork for subtle interventions. Nothing confrontational, nothing that would expose them too early. Just careful, strategic adjustments that could slow the organization down or mislead it if necessary. Meanwhile, ordinary life continued for most people. Children went to school, parents went to work, markets bustled, and the news focused on politics and entertainment. No one outside the small network of observers suspected the danger that was unfolding. The organization's actions remained invisible to the wider world, masked by secrecy, technology, and the arrogance of its members. The group of ordinary people found strength in small victories. A shipment that was diverted, a suspicious meeting they were able to disrupt quietly, or an employee who, after seeing their work, began cooperating. Each small success reinforced their belief that they could make a difference. It wasn't about heroism. It wasn't about recognition. It was about survival, the survival of millions who didn't even know a threat existed. Fear was always present, of course. They knew the organization was dangerous, and that it would not hesitate to harm anyone who threatened its plans. But they also knew that inaction guaranteed disaster. Courage, in this case, wasn't loud or public. It was quiet, calculated, and persistent. It was about making the right decisions at the right time, even when the consequences were uncertain. They also learned to rely on the world around them in unexpected ways. Ordinary tools, public data, transportation schedules, social media reports became part of their strategy. Observing human behavior gave them insights. They noticed when guards were inattentive, when shipments were miscounted, when employees appeared nervous. These were small things, almost invisible to anyone else. But they were the threads that could unravel the organization's plan if followed carefully. The more they discovered, the more they realized the scale of the threat. It wasn't just one experiment, one project, or one act of sabotage. It was a network of operations, coordinated across countries and technologies, designed to manipulate the world quietly but completely. The group understood that stopping it would not be simple. They couldn't confront the organization openly. They couldn't rely on authorities who might dismiss their warnings. They had to be smart, patient, and persistent. Yet, amidst the tension and danger, they found moments of hope. Each connection they made with other observers, each successful diversion of a plan, reminded them that ordinary people could have extraordinary impact. They were proving something fundamental, that even the most powerful, consecutive forces could be challenged by intelligence, courage, and the will to act. The organization, meanwhile, continued to move forward, unaware of the network quietly forming around it. It assumed the world outside was passive, incapable of understanding or responding. But human instinct, curiosity, and vigilance were forming an invisible counterforce. And as the organization's plan approached a critical stage, that counterforce was preparing, slowly, methodically, and without drawing attention, to strike at the very foundation of the plot. What the organization didn't know was that patience and careful observation could be more powerful than technology or secrecy. The group's ordinary nature was an advantage. They could blend in, go unnoticed, and make adjustments without raising suspicion. Their small victories built confidence, their careful planning built resilience, and their unwavering determination built the foundation of resistance that the niche organization could never predict. The ordinary humans who observed, documented, and acted were becoming the invisible shield of the world. They didn't have armies, weapons, or formal authority. They had intelligence, courage, patience, and collaboration. And sometimes that was more powerful than any secret weapon, laboratory, or plan. They were humanity's first, quiet defenders. Every move the organization made from that point forward carried risk, even though it did not realize it. Every shipment, every experiment, every calculated step was being monitored. And slowly, the cracks in the organization's confidence began to form. Its members, so sure of their power and secrecy, were walking towards something that could undo years of planning. It was a silent battle, invisible to most, but its outcome would decide the future of the entire human race. The ordinary people, aware of the danger, pressed on. They were careful, patient, and deliberate. They knew the organization would eventually act, and when it did, every piece of evidence, every prepared countermeasure, and every carefully documented observation would be crucial. They weren't just waiting. They were preparing quietly, invisibly, and effectively to protect a world that had no idea it was in danger. And so, the second part of the story unfolded, not with explosions or loud confrontations, but with quiet determination, careful observation, and strategic patience. Humanity's first line of defense was forming in secret, ordinary people standing against extraordinary danger. The organization, confident in its control and power, remained unaware that every step it took brought it closer to a web it could not see in that quiet, invisible struggle. The stage was set for the next chapter, a confrontation that would test courage, intelligence, and the will to survive. The ordinary humans, armed with nothing but determination and cleverness, were slowly turning the tide. And though the world continued in ignorance, the seeds of resistance were already taking root, ready to grow into something powerful, unstoppable, and capable of facing the darkness that threatened to engulf humanity. The small group of humans had been observing for months, quietly collecting evidence, making careful notes, and studying every small detail of the organization's movements. They knew they couldn't act recklessly. One wrong step could alert the organization and destroy months of preparation. They weren't warriors, and they didn't have weapons, but they had patience, intelligence, and careful planning. And sometimes, patience could be as powerful as any army. They realized that direct confrontation was impossible. The organization had resources, technology, and networks far beyond what they could counter openly. But they also noticed something important. The organization had weaknesses. Even the most careful humans make mistakes. Sometimes a shipment was labeled incorrectly, a schedule didn't match, or a member of the organization let their guard down. These small mistakes were invisible to most people, but to the group watching carefully, they were opportunities. The humans decided to act strategically, not forcefully. They didn't try to stop everything at once. Instead, they started creating small diversions. They introduced tiny false pieces of information into the paths the organization monitored, hoping to confuse or slow them down. A wrong report here, a deliberately visible action there, small nudges that could cause delays or miscalculations. It was like moving chess pieces in a game where the other player didn't even know the game had started at the same time. They continued documenting everything. Every unusual shipment, every meeting, every minor error was carefully recorded. They mapped the organization's movements, traced its networks, and followed its communications as much as possible. Ordinary tools, public data, observations, even social media became their instruments. They had no secret labs, no spies, no formal authority, but they had human curiosity and determination. And that became their greatest strength. The organization continued to move forward, confident in its plan. Its members believed they were untouchable, that no one could possibly understand their operations. They ignored small anomalies, thinking they were irrelevant, or worse, believing the world outside too chaotic to notice. But the humans had learned how to anticipate these moves. They predicted actions based on patterns, psychological behavior, and even timing. They didn't have inside access, but they had insight, the kind of insight that comes from watching closely and thinking carefully. The humans began setting subtle traps. Nothing violent, nothing overt, but carefully designed scenarios that could force the organization into revealing more of its plan or making a misstep. For example, they allowed small shipments to go through, but slightly delayed, forcing the organization to adjust schedules. They left traces of false information in ways that could be discovered by the organization's internal systems, knowing the organization would act on it. Every small move was like pulling a string, gradually leading the organization into a web without them realizing it. It was a slow, delicate process. Each action required patience and calculation. If they moved too quickly, they could be detected. If they moved too slowly, the organization could reach a point of irreversible damage. They had to find the balance, and it required constant observation. They worked in shifts, covering every possible angle, sharing information in secure ways, and analyzing each small result. Their efforts were invisible to the world, yet critical. Meanwhile, ordinary life continued around them. People walked on. Streets, children went to school, and the world remained unaware of the danger lurking just out of sight. The organization's operations were hidden in plain view. High-tech laboratories, private transport systems, and hidden warehouses moved quietly, unnoticed. Most people would never suspect anything, and the humans counted on that. Their advantage was invisibility. They were ordinary, unassuming, and therefore difficult to detect. The humans also learned to anticipate mistakes made by the organization's members. People are predictable in small ways. Fatigue, overconfidence, arrogance, and habit all create opportunities. They studied routines, noticing patterns that could be exploited subtly. A late-night shift with one guard alone, a miscounted shipment, a meeting scheduled without proper checks, each became a chance to intervene without anyone realizing it. It was careful, quiet, and entirely human-centered. The group didn't work alone. They had allies they hadn't met personally. Researchers, engineers, and analysts who noticed the same strange patterns. These quiet collaborators shared information online, connected dots, and offered insights. Together, the network grew stronger, forming a web of observation and preparation. The organization, confident in its secrecy, remained unaware that this invisible network was forming around it, preparing a trap it could not see. The humans also considered the psychological aspects of the plan. They realized the organization's confidence and arrogance could be used against it. People who believe they are invincible often overlook details. They become predictable, overconfident, and careless. By anticipating human behavior, driven by fear or overconfidence, the observers could guide the organization unknowingly into their own mistakes. Each misstep could be magnified, creating opportunities to disrupt the plan without ever confronting it directly. As time passed, the humans began to see results. Small diversions led to delays, false data caused minor errors, and careful observation allowed them to anticipate the organization's next steps. Each tiny success reinforced their determination and provided more information. They realized that even a small group of ordinary people, if careful and patient, could influence events on a scale they had never imagined. Despite their progress, they remained cautious. They knew the organization could retaliate at any moment if it discovered the interference. Every move was calculated, and every decision weighed carefully. They avoided unnecessary risks, focused on observation, and prepared contingencies for every scenario. Ordinary tools became instruments of subtle control. Ordinary people became agents of observation, and patience became a weapon. The organization, oblivious to the growing web around it, continued implementing its plans. It moved confidently, thinking that years of preparation and secrecy were enough to secure success. But the humans had learned to predict patterns, anticipate actions, and introduce subtle interventions. The organization's belief in control was its greatest weakness, and the humans intended to exploit it. One day, the humans noticed a critical opportunity. A major step in the organization's plan was about to be executed. It was risky, complex, and heavily dependent on timing. A single misstep could unravel everything. The humans prepared carefully, analyzing every detail, predicting every movement, and preparing subtle interventions that could slow or misdirect the organization without revealing themselves. It was a delicate dance. One wrong move, and they could fail. But the potential to protect countless lives made the risk worthwhile. The first part of the trap was set. False information was quietly introduced, small diversions were created, and timing was subtly adjusted. The humans remained invisible, watching, waiting, and anticipating the organization's response. It was a test, a way to see how the organization would react when their carefully laid plans were nudged off course. The humans didn't yet confront the organization directly, but the first threads of a larger web were taking shape. ready to entangle the organization in ways it could never foresee. The beauty of the plan lay in its simplicity. The humans didn't need force or confrontation. They needed intelligence, observation, and patience. By acting quietly, subtly, and consistently, they could guide the organization's movements into areas where mistakes would compound, revealing the vulnerability of what seemed invincible. It was human ingenuity against arrogance, careful observation against meticulous planning, and determination against overconfidence. As the organization moved toward executing its critical step, the humans watched every movement. They noticed the timing of shipments, the sequence of experiments, and the interactions between members. Each observation allowed them to adjust their interventions, increasing the likelihood of success. They didn't act recklessly, didn't rush, and didn't seek recognition. Their goal was simple: protect humanity quietly, intelligently, and effectively. The first signs of trouble for the organization began to appear. Small errors, previously unnoticed, became visible under the careful observation of the humans. Delays appeared where there should have been none, and members began to question schedules and processes that had seemed flawless before. The humans didn't celebrate, didn't intervene directly, but noted every detail. Each small crack was a step closer to disrupting the organization's plan entirely. The trap was not yet fully sprung, but the stage was set. The humans had prepared, carefully anticipated behavior, and nudged the organization into positions where mistakes could have larger consequences. Every move was calculated, every observation analyzed, and every intervention subtle. The organization remained unaware, confident in its control, unaware that it was moving into a web of human ingenuity that it could not see. In that quiet, invisible struggle, the ordinary humans were proving something extraordinary. They were showing that intelligence, patience, and determination could be more powerful than secrecy, technology, or arrogance. They were ordinary people doing extraordinary things, slowly building a defense that the moment the humans had been preparing for finally arrived. Months of observation, careful planning, and subtle interventions were about to converge. The organization, confident as ever, was about to execute a major part of its plan. They believed everything was under control. Every step had been rehearsed, every schedule carefully planned, and every member briefed. They felt unstoppable, as if nothing could touch them. But they had forgotten one crucial factor: ordinary humans could think, adapt, and act in ways no plan could fully anticipate. The small group, watching quietly, invisibly, had positioned themselves perfectly. Every shipment, every communication, every move of the organization had been monitored. They knew when the organization would act, how it would act, and where it would make its next move. They had been waiting for this moment, not to attack directly, but to guide events in a way that would force the organization into making mistakes. Patience had been their tool, and now it was ready to be used. It started subtly. A shipment that was supposed to arrive on schedule was delayed by a tiny, almost unnoticeable factor. A communication chain, meant to be flawless, contained small gaps introduced carefully by the humans. Each of these small disruptions seemed insignificant on its own, but together they began to ripple through the organization's plan. Members started noticing things that didn't add up. The first signs of confusion appeared, quiet and small, but they were enough to make the organization slow down. The humans had anticipated this reaction. They didn't panic. They didn't rush. They continued to observe, recording every movement, every adjustment, and every decision. They knew that by staying patient and silent, they could allow the organization's own confidence and arrogance to work against it. Every overconfident decision, every assumption that nothing could go wrong, became a piece of the trap. The organization was moving forward blindly, unaware that the web of human ingenuity was tightening around them. As the organization tried to correct small errors, the humans guided them further into their trap. False leads, slight delays, and carefully placed evidence led the organization to make decisions that seemed logical at first, but were actually part of the humans' carefully planned interventions. Every correction made by the organization only pushed them closer to critical points where mistakes would compound. It was a delicate dance, invisible to anyone outside the small network of observers. The tension within the organization began to grow. Members who had always acted with confidence now hesitated. Orders were questioned, schedules doubted, and communication became more cautious. They did not yet know why things were going wrong, only that the plan was slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, the humans observed everything, making notes, predicting reactions, and preparing the next layer of subtle interventions. Each ripple of confusion made the eventual capture of the organization more likely. Outside observers, ordinary. Citizens who had been part of the network quietly celebrated small victories. Nothing was visible to the world, but they could see the cracks forming in the organization's plan. They were not acting openly. They didn't need to, but each small error revealed by their preparation was a sign that their efforts were working. The organization had underestimated the power of ordinary people working together, and now that underestimation was costing them dearly. The humans had also prepared contingencies. If the organization tried to accelerate its plan to compensate for delays, the humans had pre-planned countermeasures. Alternate routes, subtle misdirections, and carefully placed obstacles ensured that any hasty actions would only increase the organization's vulnerability. They weren't trying to confront with force. They were using strategy, observation, and human ingenuity. Every action the organization took was being guided into areas of risk without their knowledge. The first major failure came in the form of a miscommunication within the organization. A critical message was delayed, causing a shipment to be routed incorrectly. It was a minor error, but in the larger plan, it created cascading delays. Members panicked slightly, adjusting schedules, reallocating resources, and trying to fix the mistake. But every adjustment had been anticipated by the humans. Each corrective action led the organization deeper into the carefully set trap. It was invisible, silent, and perfect in its execution. By now, confusion had spread through the organization like a virus. Members argued quietly, doubted their leadership, and questioned decisions that had always seemed flawless. The humans continued to observe, recording everything, making predictions, and preparing further subtle interventions. They had no need for confrontation, yet the organization was dismantling itself from within, driven by mistakes that were quietly guided by human observation. The humans also began to introduce small distractions that increased stress within the organization. A shipment delayed slightly here, an employee questioned there, and minor technical problems that appeared just at the right moment. All were carefully designed to increase pressure on the organization without alerting it to the presence of external observers. Stress caused overconfidence to falter, and small miscalculations now had greater consequences. The trap was working exactly as planned. Outside, life continued normally. People walked, worked, and lived their lives completely unaware that a powerful organization was failing because of a network of ordinary humans working quietly. The contrast between the calm normalcy of everyday life and the growing panic within the organization highlighted the power of patience, observation, and subtle strategy. It showed that heroism doesn't always come from armies or weapons, but often from intelligence, courage, and determination. The humans also prepared for worst-case scenarios. If the organization tried to regroup, if it discovered part of the network, or if it tried to move aggressively, there were secondary interventions ready. Contingency plans allowed the humans to adapt to changing situations, ensuring that the trap would hold even if the organization realized something was wrong. They relied on flexibility, quick thinking, and anticipation tools that required human intelligence rather than brute force. By the time the organization realized that its plan was unraveling, it was already too late. The small errors, minor delays, and subtle misdirections had combined to create significant failures. Critical shipments were misrouted, communications were delayed, and members were confused and doubting themselves. Panic began to replace confidence. The organization, once unstoppable, found itself reacting rather than controlling. Each action taken to correct mistakes only led to more errors, proving the human strategy was effective. The humans remained calm, watching, adjusting, and documenting every movement. They didn't celebrate openly, knowing that the organization could still respond unpredictably. But inside, they felt a quiet satisfaction. Their months of preparation, observation, and patience were finally producing results. The organization was trapped, not by force, but by human ingenuity, strategic thinking, and the careful application of observation. Finally, as the organization scrambled to regain control, the humans prepared for the final step of the trap. Critical evidence had been collected, patterns had been established, and weaknesses fully mapped. When the authorities, alerted quietly by the human network, intervened, the organization was caught completely off guard. Its members had no idea that the world was watching, no idea that ordinary people had anticipated every move, and no idea that their own mistakes had been guided toward their downfall. The intervention was swift, coordinated, and precise. Facilities were secured, critical members detained, and dangerous materials secured. The organization, which had once believed itself untouchable, was powerless. All its planning, all its secrecy, all its confidence had been undone by the quiet, invisible work of ordinary humans who refused to ignore what they had seen. In the aftermath, it became clear how extraordinary the human effort had been. No armies had been needed, no weapons had been deployed, and no violence had been required. Intelligence, patience, observation, and determination had been enough. Ordinary humans, working quietly and methodically, had dismantled a threat that could have destroyed countless lives. The story proved that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it works quietly, invisibly, and with incredible effect. Organization's downfall was complete, but the lessons remained. Even the most meticulous and confident groups can fail when ordinary humans are determined to act. Secrecy, power, and arrogance cannot withstand careful observation, strategic planning, and human ingenuity. The world had been protected not by those with authority or force, but by ordinary people who paid attention, asked questions, and acted when others would not. And so, the first confrontation had ended not with explosions or violence, but with strategy, patience, and quiet intervention. The humans had set the trap, guided the organization into it, and observed as it unraveled. The stage was now set for humanity to reflect, rebuild, and learn from the extraordinary courage and intelligence displayed in the shadows. The story proved a simple truth. Even the most ordinary humans, when observant, determined, and careful, could outsmart the most dangerous threats. In this quiet, invisible battle, humanity had already won. And though the world remained unaware of the danger it had narrowly avoided, the invisible network of ordinary hung. The aftermath of the organization's unraveling was unlike anything the world had expected. For most people, life continued as usual, unaware of the enormous danger that had been averted. The news reported strange financial irregularities, some high-profile arrests, and security alerts, but the true scope of the threat remained hidden. The public had no idea how close they had come to disaster. Yet behind the scenes, ordinary humans, those who had observed, documented, and acted quietly, were beginning to feel the weight of what they had accomplished. The human network that had dismantled the organization began sharing their findings with authorities and experts, carefully explaining every small detail. They showed evidence of shipments misdirected, experiments disrupted, and the tiny errors that had been exploited to guide the organization into its downfall. It was meticulous work, almost like piecing together a puzzle, but it provided a clear picture of what had been prevented. Experts and law enforcement were stunned. They realized that without the careful observation and quiet actions of ordinary people, the organization could have succeeded. For the ordinary humans who had worked in silence for months, there was no celebration in public. Recognition was not their goal. Their work had been invisible by design. Yet internally, there was a deep sense of satisfaction and relief. They had faced a threat that seemed impossible to confront, and through patience, intelligence, and courage, they had succeeded. Every observation, every note, every subtle intervention had contributed to protecting humanity. It was an extraordinary reminder of the power of ordinary people when they refused to remain passive in the face of danger. The world outside remained largely unaware, but slowly lessons began to emerge. Governments started asking difficult questions about the vulnerabilities the organization had exploited. How had secret networks gone unnoticed? How had critical information been manipulated without detection? Investigations revealed weaknesses in oversight, communication, and preparedness, and authorities began implementing reforms to ensure that no group could attempt such a threat again without being detected. Experts emphasized that the most remarkable part of the story was not technology or power, but human ingenuity. Ordinary people, armed with observation, patience, and intelligence, had outsmarted a powerful organization. Their actions prove that courage doesn't always need weapons, armies, or authority. Sometimes it exists quietly, invisibly, in the form of determination, curiosity, and persistence. People who had been dismissed as ordinary were now recognized as the invisible guardians of humanity. The small group that had orchestrated the observations remained connected, though carefully. They understood that their work had made a difference, but they also realized that the world could always face new threats. They began preparing systems to detect future dangers early, relying on the same principles that had guided their initial success: observation, careful planning, patience, and strategic action. In many ways, they had become the first line of invisible defense, a network of ordinary humans ready to act if the world needed them again. Society, slowly and unknowingly, began to change in response. Authorities increased transparency and accountability, implementing systems to monitor unusual activities more effectively. Scientists and engineers collaborated more closely, sharing discoveries and anomalies that might previously have been ignored. Ordinary citizens, inspired indirectly by reports of small interventions and subtle victories, began to pay more attention to their surroundings, to question unusual behavior, and to take small steps that collectively increased global vigilance. The story of the thwarted organization also highlighted the importance of ordinary people acting together. The humans who had protected the world were not superheroes. They had no extraordinary powers, no access to armies or top-secret technology. They were simply people who refused to ignore what they saw, who worked together quietly, and who trusted that intelligence and observation could make a difference. Their success became a lesson in collaboration, demonstrating that when ordinary humans unite around a common goal, even the most overwhelming threats can be countered. One of the most important aspects of their work was documentation. Every note, photo, video, and observation had been preserved with care. This not only allowed authorities to dismantle the organization fully, but also created a record for future generations. It was a map of how ordinary humans, using nothing more than intelligence, courage, and careful planning, had prevented an unimaginable disaster. The evidence showed that human vigilance, not force, could protect society from threats that seemed insurmountable. The humans themselves learned valuable lessons. They discovered that persistence matters more than speed, that observation can be more powerful than confrontation, and that patience can allow ordinary people to achieve extraordinary outcomes. Each challenge they faced deciding when to act, how to intervene, and when to remain hidden taught them more about human nature, strategy, and the power of collaboration. They had faced an almost impossible situation and had come out victorious, proving that intelligence and courage can outweigh power and secrecy. As time passed, the humans observed subtle changes in the organization's remaining members. Some were arrested, some were detained for questioning, and others went into hiding. Their arrogance had been shattered. They no longer acted with the same confidence or recklessness that had made them so dangerous. Ordinary humans, using nothing but their wits, had forced them into a corner. And the organization, once untouchable in its secrecy and planning, had become a warning, a demonstration that even the most meticulous plans could fail when humans act intelligently. The story of the humans' actions quietly spread, inspiring others. People began to understand that vigilance, observation, and small actions could prevent large-scale disasters. Communities became more aware, scientists more observant, and ordinary citizens more willing to question what seemed normal. Though the public did not know the full details, the ripple effects of the humans' courage and intelligence were felt worldwide. It was a reminder that ordinary people have power, that small actions matter, and that human ingenuity is a force that can change the course of events. The group continued to refine their methods. They realized that the world would always face threats, some visible, some hidden. But their approach, careful observation, strategic planning, and patient intervention had proven effective. They shared knowledge with trusted authorities, taught lessons about the importance of vigilance, and began developing systems that could detect anomalies before they became crises. Their work was quiet, invisible, and ongoing, but it created a foundation for future protection. The broader impact of their success became clear over time. Governments improved coordination. Scientists and engineers shared information more effectively, and ordinary people became more observant and cautious. Security measures became smarter, communication networks more transparent, and detection systems more sensitive to unusual activity. All of this was influenced indirectly by the quiet work of ordinary humans who had refused to ignore what they saw. Their actions had changed the world, even if most people never knew it. The humans themselves reflected on the experience. They understood that courage is not always loud or public. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and strategic. Sometimes it exists in the form of observation, careful planning, and persistence. They had faced a powerful, secretive organization and succeeded without force, without armies, and without recognition. Their story demonstrated that ordinary humans, when determined and clever, can achieve extraordinary results. The world had been protected not by weapons or brute power, but by the intelligence and determination of ordinary people. They had acted quietly, strategically, and with great care, ensuring that the organization's plan failed completely. Their success became a testament to the power of observation, collaboration, and patience. It was a reminder that even in the face of enormous danger, human ingenuity and courage can prevail. And so, the aftermath of the crisis revealed a profound truth. Ordinary humans have extraordinary potential. Through careful observation, subtle intervention, and persistent action, they can prevent disasters that might seem impossible to stop. The humans who had protected the world had proven this beyond doubt. They remained hidden, quiet, and humble, but their impact was monumental. Humanity had been saved, and the lesson was clear. Courage, intelligence, and persistence are often more powerful than power. Secrecy and arrogance, the world, unknowingly, had been shielded by ordinary people who refused to be passive. Their quiet determination, intelligence, and strategic thinking had turned a near catastrophe into a victory for humanity. And though their work was largely invisible, the effects would continue to shape society, security, and vigilance for years to come. The story was not just about preventing disaster. It was about showing that ordinary humans, when they act thoughtfully and bravely, can change the course of history. With the organization fully dismantled and its plans foiled, the world began to breathe a quiet, unspoken sigh of relief. Most people never realized how close they had come to disaster, but behind the scenes, a network of ordinary humans who had worked tirelessly for months continued to operate. They had seen the worst that secrecy, arrogance, and unchecked power could bring, and they understood that vigilance must continue. The victory was real, but it was also a lesson that danger never truly disappears. It only sleeps until someone notices again. The humans who had observed, planned, and subtly guided the downfall of the organization began to reflect on what had happened. They had acted without recognition, without power, and without force. Yet their actions had saved millions, possibly billions. It was a quiet triumph, born not from violence or confrontation, but from intelligence, observation, and patience. Every small detail they had recorded, every subtle intervention they had made, had mattered. Their work had shown the world a new kind of heroism, one rooted in thought, strategy, and care, even as society returned to normal. The effects of their actions rippled quietly through governments, corporations, and communities. Security systems were re-evaluated, oversight became stricter, and protocols for unusual activity were improved. Scientists and engineers began collaborating more openly, sharing information that might have previously been ignored. Ordinary citizens, inspired indirectly by reports of vigilance and subtle victories, started paying closer attention to the world around them. They asked questions, noticed anomalies, and understood that small actions could prevent large disasters. The humans who had been part of the network also realized the importance of preparedness. They understood that threats like this organization could appear again, perhaps in new forms or hidden in ways that were harder to detect. They began establishing systems for future observation, documenting strategies, and building networks that could respond to threats quickly and effectively. They were careful to remain unnoticed, because the strength of their approach lay in invisibility, discretion, and subtle intervention. The experience had taught them another crucial lesson. Ordinary humans are more capable than they often believe. They had faced an organization with far more resources, technology, and influence than they had, and yet they succeeded. Their success was not accidental. It came from observing carefully, thinking critically, and acting strategically. It came from the courage to persist even when others doubted them. It came from understanding that patience and intelligence could sometimes be more powerful than brute force or authority. As months passed, the humans continued their quiet work. They monitored systems, observed patterns, and prepared for anomalies, knowing that vigilance must never stop. They had become the invisible guardians of the world, not through fear or power, but through careful observation, knowledge, and collaboration. Their work was silent, hidden, and unnoticed, but it provided a shield that the world could never fully see. The story of their actions also began to inspire small but meaningful changes in others. People who had witnessed minor interventions, unusual coincidences, or simple acts of vigilance started understanding the power of paying attention. Communities became slightly more cautious, authorities became more responsive, and ordinary people began to realize that they had the power to notice and act in small ways that could make a significant difference. It was a subtle cultural shift, born from the invisible efforts of a few. The humans also reflected on the nature of courage. They realized that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in quiet decisions, in careful planning, in the choice to act when others would ignore danger. Theirs had been a quiet heroism, invisible to the world, yet profound in its impact. They had proven that ordinary humans, when observant, patient, and determined, could face extraordinary, threats and emerge victorious. The dismantled organization was a reminder of what could happen when arrogance, secrecy, and unchecked power go unchallenged. But it also served as a testament to what could happen when humans act thoughtfully, strategically, and together. The ordinary humans who had saved the world became an example not publicly, not with fame, but through the outcomes of their actions. They showed that observation, intelligence, and persistence are tools that can change history. Over time, the humans worked on strengthening the invisible network they had built. They trained themselves to notice patterns, to analyze data, and to think critically about anomalies. They created contingency plans for potential future threats, understanding that danger often comes in unexpected forms. Their experience had taught them that preparedness, observation, and collaboration are more important than any weapon or technology. Human ingenuity, patience, and courage were the real power. The world slowly adapted to lessons that the humans' actions had indirectly taught it. Governments invested more in observation and security, scientists shared knowledge more freely, and ordinary citizens became slightly more aware of what was happening around them. The ripple effect of the humans' quiet interventions was subtle but profound. Though most people never knew the full story, the systems and behaviors they influenced made society safer and more vigilant. The humans themselves learned to value the ordinary. They realized that heroism does not always require extraordinary abilities. Sometimes it requires careful attention, thoughtful action, and patience. Their experience proved that ordinary people, acting with intelligence and determination, could face challenges that seemed impossible. Their quiet actions, invisible to the wider world, had shaped the course of history. Even as time passed, they remained watchful. They knew that the dismantled organization was not the end of threats. Danger could take new forms, and human arrogance could give rise to new schemes. But they were prepared. Observation, careful planning, collaboration, and patience had proven themselves to be powerful tools. The humans had learned that vigilance was a lifelong responsibility, one that could not be ignored without risking catastrophe. The world, largely unaware of what had been avoided, went on with its daily routines. Children played, workers went to their jobs, and life continued. But the humans who had acted quietly watched, listened, and analyzed. They continued to prepare for the unknown, knowing that even when the world seemed safe, the seeds of danger could sprout in unseen corners. Their work was silent, methodical, and patient, but it was also essential. Through all of this, the humans remained humble. They had no desire for fame or recognition. Their goal had never been to be heroes in the eyes of the world. Their goal was to protect humanity. And in doing so, they had accomplished something extraordinary. They had proven that intelligence, courage, patience, and observation are often more powerful than force, authority, or technology. Ordinary humans, when they act thoughtfully and decisively, can achieve the extraordinary. The dismantled organization served as a final lesson. Arrogance, secrecy, and overconfidence can be defeated when ordinary people pay attention, think critically, and act strategically. The humans had shown that the world's safety does not always rely on powerful institutions or advanced technology. It can rely on human vigilance, intelligence, and courage. And sometimes, the quiet, careful actions of a few can save the many. As the years passed, the invisible network of humans continued its work. They trained themselves and others to notice what might be overlooked, to think critically about anomalies, and to act when necessary. They became mentors for vigilance, strategy, and observation. Though their efforts remained largely hidden, they ensured that humanity would be more prepared for future threats. Their lessons were passed quietly, invisibly, but they left an enduring mark on society. In the end, the story of the humans who saved the world quietly proved a simple truth: courage, intelligence, patience, and observation are the greatest tools humanity has. Ordinary people, acting together and thinking carefully, can face extraordinary threats and succeed. Their triumph was not measured in battles won or explosions avoided. It was measured in the lives saved, the disasters prevented, and the systems improved. The world was safer because ordinary humans refused to ignore what they saw. They acted quietly, strategically, and intelligently, demonstrating that heroism does not always require force, fame, or extraordinary power. Sometimes it requires patience, observation, courage, and persistence. And in this quiet, invisible way, humanity had triumphed. The humans who had acted so courageously continued to watch, learn, and prepare. They knew that the world would always face threats, but they also knew that ordinary people, when willing to act thoughtfully, strategically, and with determination, could protect it. Their story was one of vigilance, intelligence, courage, and quiet triumph, a reminder that even the smallest actions, taken with care and purpose, can change the course of history. And so, humanity emerged from the crisis not only safe but wiser. Ordinary humans, through patience, observation, and intelligence, had prevented disaster. They had outsmarted arrogance and secrecy, proving that the true power lies in thoughtful action, strategic planning, and the courage to act when it matters most. Though the world remained unaware, humanity owed its safety to the quiet, extraordinary efforts of ordinary people.